The night begins softly, the air resting over old valleys and quiet rivers, carrying the faint scent of soil and ash. Around 5000 BC, people of the early world lived close to the ground and the flame. Their homes were made of reed and mud, their tools shaped from stone and patience. Each morning began with the slow lighting of fire. Each evening ended beside its glow. They watched the sky for signs of weather, the water for food, and the earth for growth. Among the wild grasses, they found a plant that seemed to give more than the rest. Tall, fibrous, gentle in scent. Its stalks were strong yet flexible, its fibers pale and soft beneath rough skin. When pulled apart, they formed threads that could be twisted into rope, woven into cloth, turned into something that lasted. The plant gave them texture, shelter, and quiet utility, a bridge between need and creation. Its seeds, small and shining, could be crushed for oil or eaten for strength. Every part of it was useful, and so it became part of their daily rhythm, a companion of work and rest. At night, when the fires burned low and the sky opened wide above them, someone tossed the leftover stalks into the embers. The smoke rose differently, slower, heavier, curling through the dark like a drifting thought. Its scent was rich, earthy, calming. Around the fire, the people grew still. The ache in their limbs softened, their breathing steadied, and the air itself seemed to slow. They did not name it, nor worship it. It was simply there, a quiet thread that joined the body to the world, the mind to rest. The plant did not change them, it reminded them of what they already knew, that survival was not only work, but also the art of pausing, of letting the world move around them. In time, they learned its patterns, how it grew, how it burned, how its fibers could outlast storms. The ropes tied their shelters, the cords held their tools, the oil fed their lamps. Its smoke drifted through nights without names. Its scent lingered in hair and cloth. It became a part of existence itself, neither sacred nor forbidden, only known. Beneath the same stars that shone on every age after, the people rested in its calm, and the world, for a moment, felt still enough to last forever. China's early hands and the thought of healing. By the time the Earth had turned toward the third millennium before our time, around 2700 BC, the plant had already traveled eastward, carried along the quiet routes that wound through the river valleys of early China. The land was green and heavy with mist. Rivers ran like veins across the plain, feeding rice paddies and forests of willow. The people who lived here worked close to the soil, their days marked not by clocks but by the rhythm of rain and sunlight. They knew the scent of roots, the touch of bark, the way leaves could speak to the body. To them, medicine was not a science of separation, but of balance. Warmth and coolness, breath and stillness, the outer world and the inner one meeting somewhere unseen. Among the many herbs that filled their woven baskets, ginseng, ginger, lotus, and reed, there grew this same familiar stalk, tall and fibrous, bending gently in the breeze. They called it Ma, a simple name, soft to say, known in every village by the river. It appeared beside herbs and roots in the earliest books of healing, written on strips of bamboo, inked by careful hands. Those healers did not claim to invent medicine, they listened to the world instead. They observed how a leaf folded under frost, how animals sought certain plants when wounded, how smoke changed the pulse of breath. They boiled the plant seeds to calm fever, pressed its oil to soothe aching joints, and steeped its leaves in hot water to ease the unrest of the mind. In every home, bundles of dried stalks hung from beams, ready to be used in 1,000 small ways, all key to wrap food, to bind wounds, to light the night. The people learned, slowly and without theory, that warmth and rest could live within the same leaf. When crushed, it released a faint green scent, clean and grounding. When burned, it filled the air with a quiet haze that softened thought without dulling it. Smoke was not used for ceremony, but for comfort, to ease the long nights, to calm the tired, to help the restless find sleep. It was a gesture as simple as breathing. No prayer, no offering, just a moment of stillness in which the world grew lighter. The plant became a bridge between pain and peace, between the earth and the body that depended on it. In the shaded courtyards of small villages, healers worked patiently. Their tables were lined with mortars, stones worn smooth by centuries of grinding. The sound of pestles echoed softly through bamboo walls, powdered herbs mixed with water and oil, thick pastes wrapped in cloth, smoke rising in thin, steady trails. When a patient came, the healer would first listen, not to the words, but to the rhythm of the breath, the color of the skin, the pulse beneath the wrist. They believed that illness was not a battle, but a balance lost. And when they reached for this plant, they did not see magic or danger. They saw steadiness, the same steadiness that held a roof against wind, that bound a fishing net, that burned with a clean, even flame when the night grew cold. Across the empire that was beginning to form, scattered kingdoms bound by rivers, by language, by trade, the plant followed quietly. It grew in gardens beside rice and millet, in the courtyards of scholars, in the fields of peasants. Hemp fiber was spun into thread, twisted into rope, woven into cloth that outlasted seasons. The texture was rough at first, but when washed and beaten, it softened into something close to linen. People wore it daily. They used it to make shoes, sails, nets, mats, and paper. Its strength was quiet but dependable. In the records of early dynasties, it appeared again and again, not as something strange or forbidden, but as a simple tool of life, a silent companion to human hands. In workshops filled with the smell of oil and ash, men and women worked side by side, their fingers moving in rhythm with the spinning wheel. Strands of hemp turned into endless threads. The air shimmered with dust and sunlight. In the distance, children played by the water, chasing the shadows of cranes. At night, the same plant that built their nets and walls also gave them light. The oil pressed from its seeds burned in clay lamps, steady and smokeless, illuminating the faces gathered for evening meals. There was a softness to that light, not bright, not harsh, but alive, flickering like breath. Healers continued to write about it, each generation adding new observations to the old scrolls. They noted that the seeds cooled the body when fever burned, that the oil brought movement to stiff limbs, that smoke lifted sorrow and quieted trembling hands. They never separated the practical from the spiritual. To heal the body was to calm the mind. To calm the mind was to return the world to balance. The plant stood at the center of that understanding. Humble, common, eternal. The emperors who came later would build their palaces on the same soil where this plant had once grown wild. Their robes shimmered with silk, their scrolls written on fine paper, their physicians trained in the old ways. But beneath all the splendor, the same quiet traditions remained. In village homes, grandmothers still brewed the oil to ease their grandchildren's coughs. Farmers still twisted ropes from the fibers to bind their tools. Fishermen still patched their nets by lantern light. No one called it medicine anymore, nor invention, nor wonder. It was simply part of existence, like water, like rice, like the smell of rain before it falls. The thought of healing in those early centuries was not confined to temples or scholars. It lived in gestures, a bowl of warm broth, a compress on the forehead, a hand resting gently on the back. The plant was there in each of those acts, invisible but essential. It tied the physical to the emotional, the earth to the breath. Even in poetry, it appeared as a symbol of steadiness, of something that bends without breaking, endures without complaint. Writers spoke of the hemp heart, meaning patience and calm strength. As centuries passed, the old bamboo slips began to crack and fade, but their knowledge survived in memory and habit. The same fibers that once bound tools now held scrolls together. The same smoke that once drifted over a campfire now floated in the courtyards of great physicians. The same oil that once fed the poor now burned in lamps of scholars who wrote by night. History often records wars, kings, and monuments, but the real thread of civilization is quieter. It lies in hands that weave, in seeds that grow, in the soft endurance of things that expect nothing and give everything. By the end of the 3rd millennium BC, the plant had already touched nearly every aspect of daily life in ancient China. It clothed the body, healed the flesh, steadied the roof, and filled the lamp. It appeared in the first pharmacopoeia of the Yellow Emperor, not as a rare treasure, but as a trusted ally of life. And when the evening smoke rose once again from the fields, it carried not prayer nor fear, but familiarity, the simple comfort of something that had always been there. Even now, thousands of years later, the same valleys remember. The soil still holds the memory of those early hands, the touch of those first healers who saw no boundary between health and peace. The rivers still reflect the slow dance of mist above the fields where the plant once grew wild. And if you were to walk there at dusk, when the air grows cool and the light turns to silver, you might still catch its faint scent. That same calm breath from the ancient world, whispering softly that warmth and rest can live together in a single leaf. Across the steppes and valleys of the east. By 1000 BC, the earth had changed its skin once more. Forests stretched thinner, giving way to endless grasslands that rolled like waves beneath the sky. Here, in the wide reaches of Central Asia, nomadic people moved with the rhythm of wind and herd, following the seasons as faithfully as shadows follow light. They carried few possessions, tools of bone and bronze, woven cloth, hides tanned by hand, and among them, always, small pouches of seeds. These were not treasures in the way of gold or gem, but something deeper, something living. Each seed carried memory of firelight, of healing, of warmth found in the long nights of their ancestors. They kept them in leather sacks tied close to their saddles, beside herbs and grains, beside charms for luck and protection. In the quiet of the steppes, where no walls marked borders and the horizon never ended, the seeds traveled farther than any map could follow. When night fell and the air turned sharp, the travelers built fires out of dried dung and brittle grass. The flames burned low but steady, their smoke drifting sideways across the plain. The people rested near the warmth, their horses huddled in circles, their tents drawn tight against the wind. Before sleep, they would take the small seeds, the same kind their elders had once used, and place them on flat stones near the fire. The heat released a faint, aromatic smoke that curled upward, winding between the felt walls of their tents. It kept insects away, warmed the lungs, and brought the heavy calm of exhaustion into something gentler. They inhaled without ritual, without rule. It was a habit born of need, a quiet kindness in the middle of a vast, indifferent land. The smoke mixed with the scent of wool, sweat, and iron. Outside, Wolves howled in the distance, their voices low and uncertain. Inside, the people sank into the slow, dreamless sleep that only travel and fatigue can bring. In these open lands, stories were passed not by writing, but by breath, through the mouths of riders, herdsmen, and wanderers. The story of the plant moved as they did, changing slightly with each tongue. Some said it was a gift of the wind, a plant that followed the sky's edge wherever it went. Others said it was born from a tear of the earth, placed there to remind humans how to rest. But none called it sacred or forbidden. It was part of life's small wisdom, to eat when hungry, to breathe when weary, to let the smoke drift when the night grew too long. As the tribes traveled southward, the land changed once again. The grasses gave way to forests, the wind grew warmer, the air heavy with scent. Farther down, across the foothills and rivers, lay the lands of India, a place of bright heat and slow water, of early cities rising from riverbanks. There, the same plant found new hands, new uses, new meanings. Farmers worked the fields under a relentless sun, their backs shining with sweat, their tools sinking into rich, dark soil. In the evening, when the work was done, they gathered in the shade. They took the same leaves once burned by the nomads and ground them gently with spice and milk. The drink was warm, sweet, and soft. It cooled the heat inside the body, loosened the tightness of muscle and mind. It was not medicine, nor indulgence. It was a quiet bridge between the toil of day and the surrender of night. The drink spread through villages and temples alike. Workers shared it after harvest, travelers after long journeys, ascetics after meditation. It became part of the rhythm of living, as natural as eating or breathing. The taste was said to carry both lightness and earth, a reminder that the same plant could heal the weary body and open the inward eye. In poems carved on stone and sung by wandering bards, it was sometimes called the gentle friend, sometimes the soft leaf. It did not promise visions or revelations. It simply allowed time to soften, to slow, to become bearable. Across the subcontinent, the plant grew in the cracks between paths and walls, near rivers, beside fields. It was never absent. The farmers knew its leaves as well as they knew the shape of their own tools. Children watched their elders stir it into milk, its green color folding into white. The air in the huts smelled faintly of spice, smoke, and soil, the scent of life at rest. Those who had spent the day in fields came home with aching limbs and found ease in that cup. Those who carried burdens across mountains or through crowded markets found their thoughts settle, their breathing slow. In the ancient texts, healers recorded its presence among the 1,000 herbs of balance. It was not singled out, only noted quietly, as if the scribes knew that true power never demands attention. Back in the north, in the vast steppes where the wind never stops moving, the nomads continued their journeys. Their herds grazed under a sky so wide it seemed to have no end. The seasons turned like a wheel. Spring floods, summer heat, autumn winds, winter ice. Wherever they went, they carried the same seeds. They planted them near rivers when they camped for long, harvested their fibers for rope, burned them for warmth. The plant became part of their survival, their migration, their identity. It was the same thread that tied one tribe to another, one landscape to the next. When they traded with southern merchants, they exchanged hides and horses for spices and grain, but always the plant remained theirs, a reminder of home, of smoke curling through felt walls, of silence after the storm. To the east, where the mountains folded into valleys and rivers shimmered beneath moonlight, the plant took yet another role. Here, it was woven into cloth so strong it could last for generations. Families passed garments down from mother to daughter, the texture rough at first, then soft with wear. Ropes made from its fibers held tents against winter storms. Paper made from its stalks carried the earliest words of wisdom, inked in dark strokes that still survive. The plant was in everything, in the texture of a sleeve, in the wick of a lamp, in the smoke that drifted across the steppe. For both traveller and farmer, wanderer and worker, it was the same comfort, a small, steadfast companion that steadied the day and softened its edges. The plant did not belong to any nation or temple. It belonged to motion, to endurance, to the shared truth of survival. Whether crushed into oil, stirred into milk, or burned upon a stone, it offered the same quiet gift: relief without excess, stillness without sleep, calm without forgetting. And so the smoke hung low, curling around tents and huts alike, the same across thousands of miles. It moved through cold air and warm dusk, over plains and paddies, mingling with the scent of animals, fire, and water. Within it, time moved a little slower. The ache of travel eased, the mind loosened its grip. In that small pause, and between one breath and the next, between one world and another, humanity found something timeless, not escape, but rest. The kind of rest that has no name, that belongs equally to the steppe and the valley, to the rider and the sower, to anyone who has ever looked into the smoke and thought, I can stop for a while now. Persia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean, calm. By the time the great deserts began to shape the roads of trade, and the sun turned bronze over the wide lands between rivers, the same quiet plant had already found new homes. Across the dry air of ancient Persia, where the wind carried dust and the scent of spice, its stalks grew along the riverbanks, pale green against the golden soil. The people who lived there were traders, travellers, builders of long roads and high walls. They knew the value of endurance, how a single thread could hold a sail, how a handful of oil could light a night. From their hands, the plant found new form. Its fibers were pulled, soaked, twisted, and dried until they became cloth strong enough to carry the weight of wind. Its seeds were pressed until they released a faint, golden oil that smelled of earth after rain. When rubbed into the skin, it eased the burn of the desert wind. When poured into lamps, it burned with a steady light, soft and smokeless, guiding scribes and artisans through the long, silent hours of their craft. The Persians believed in balance, between heat and cold, between rest and effort, between body and soul. They saw in this plant a small echo of that balance. It cooled what was inflamed, it softened what was rigid, it gave strength to what was worn. In their markets, merchants sold bundles of its fibre beside spices, incense, and copper. The weavers took those bundles home and spun them into thread, their fingers stained with dust and oil. In the dim light of their workshops, the fibres whispered against each other as the looms beat their slow, rhythmic music. The finished cloth was not delicate, but it endured, used for robes, sacks, sails, and rope. Every journey that crossed the arid plains, every caravan, every ship, carried something made of it. The plant had become a companion of trade, invisible yet essential, part of the quiet machinery of civilization. Farther west, beyond the dunes and mountains, the Nile curled like a living line through Egypt. Its floods brought both hardship and renewal. Along its banks the same plant took root, growing in the thin strip of green that bordered the desert. The Egyptians, meticulous in craft and memory, found new ways to use it. They pressed its oil into their mixtures for preserving skin, for softening linen, for lighting tombs that would remain sealed for centuries. In the cool rooms of stone temples, the scent of dried leaves mixed with grain and oil, a faint, earthy fragrance that clung to jars and hands alike. Archaeologists in later ages would find fragments of its fibers in pottery, traces of its pollen in tombs, and seeds stored beside salt and cloth. Silent evidence of a plant that touched both life and afterlife. The scribes who sat under the shade of temple walls wrote of it without flourish. They listed it among practical goods, grain, oil, honey, linen, papyrus, noting that its fibers served for ropes and bindings, its oil for lamps and balms. The Egyptians did not speak of it with mystery. They treated it as something that simply belonged. It was woven into the routines of their days, into the fabric that held sails steady against the Nile wind, into the cords that bound offerings, into the cloth that wrapped the bodies of kings. Even in death, it remained close to the living, a thread between worlds. Beyond the deserts, across the waters of the Mediterranean, the same green thread found new patterns. Traders from Phoenicia carried the seeds and fibers on their ships, tucked between amphorae of wine and olive oil. In the harbours of Crete, of Greece, of the Aegean Isles, sailors unrolled ropes made from its fibers, rough but unyielding, and trusted them to hold against the sea's pull. The Mediterranean sun bleached the fibers pale, the salt softened them, and the wind tested their strength daily. In time, this plant became part of the seafaring life, an invisible partner in the movement of goods, ideas, and stories that would shape the ancient world. In the cool courtyards of Greek physicians, it took on yet another form. Healers ground its seeds, mixed them with wine or honey, and used the paste to ease pain, swelling, and fever. They observed its nature as they did all things, carefully, patiently, without superstition. It was not seen as divine, only effective. The physician Dioscorides, centuries later, would note its use among the herbs of practical value, a plant for rope and for relief. Soldiers wrapped its fibers into bandages that did not tear. Farmers wove it into sacks that held their harvest through rain and sun. Artists used its oil in lamps to paint by night. The same plant, in every place, adapted to the hands that touched it, never demanding worship, never needing a name greater than its use. When the Romans rose to power and their empire stretched across the sea, the plant followed, woven into the foundation of their daily labor. In workshops along the Tiber, rope makers soaked the stalks in water until they softened, then beat and combed them into long, pliant strands. From these came cords, sails, and paper. In the markets, merchants sold hemp cloth beside wool and flax, prized for its strength and resistance to decay. Roman physicians prescribed it in small doses for pain, noting its effect on easing the nerves and quieting the stomach. The oil burned in household lamps. The smoke, when dried leaves were tossed into the fire, filled the air with a calming scent after the noise of the day. It was never a luxury, never rare, but always near, part of the hum of civilization, woven into its practical poetry. In the homes of both the poor and the wealthy, the plant existed in quiet forms, ropes that bound the shutters during storms, cords that hung amphorae in storage rooms, oil that glowed faintly in bronze lamps. Women rubbed the oil into their hands after washing, easing the dryness left by work. Fishermen soaked their nets in it to keep them strong. Scholars wrote by its light, and soldiers wrapped their wounds in its fibers. In every gesture, the plant moved unnoticed, doing its work with quiet grace. The Mediterranean world was a chorus of motion, ships crossing, languages mixing, spices trading hands. And yet beneath it all, the same calm thread persisted. From Persia's deserts to Egypt's stone halls, from the olive groves of Greece to the harbours of Rome, this one green memory passed through time unchanged. It was a patient traveler, shaped not by conquest, but by usefulness, by the universal human wish for comfort and continuity. When night came over the sea and the air cooled, sailors leaned against the wooden rails of their ships, watching the last light sink into the horizon. The sails above them, woven from hemp and catching the last of the wind, glowed faintly in the dusk. The ropes creaked, the lamps burned, and the scent of oil mixed with salt and water. In that moment, as waves whispered against the hull and the stars appeared one by one, the same plant that had once grown by rivers and temples now carried humanity across oceans. Its story was never one of glory, but of endurance. The same quiet plant, changed only by the hands that touched it, still held the same purpose: to serve, to ease, to last. A green thread binding distant worlds into one slow, shared breath. Paths of trade, winds of travel. By the time the ancient world had stitched itself together through sand and sea, a new rhythm began to hum beneath the noise of trade. Caravans moved slowly across the deserts of Persia, their shadows stretching long and thin against the dunes. Ships rocked gently in the harbours of the Mediterranean, their sails pale against the dawn. Along these routes, over mountains, through valleys, across endless waters, the same humble plant continued its quiet migration. Hemp, the traveller without flag or master, went wherever human hands reached. It asked for nothing but soil, sunlight and care, and in return it gave what people needed most: strength, light and rest. Its seeds rattled in the pouches of merchants, its fibers coiled in bundles of trade, its oil sealed in clay jars that gleamed like amber when caught by the morning light. Persian traders were among the first to carry it far westward, their caravans heavy with silk, spices, lapis, and stories. The Silk Road was not one road, but a weaving of paths, a slow conversation between civilizations that never met, but somehow understood each other through trade. Along that long spine of the earth, stretching from the heart of Asia to the blue edges of the sea, the scent of pressed hemp oil mingled with that of pepper, resin, and sweat. It travelled in the shadows of camels and horses, crossing through dust storms and mountain passes. At night, when the fires flickered in the desert wind, travellers used the oil to light their lamps, the ropes to tie their tents, the fibers to repair their packs. They spoke in many tongues, but the gestures were the same: lighting, binding, weaving, resting. The plant moved from hand to hand, name to name, but its purpose stayed constant: to endure. Across the coasts of Africa, the story continued in rhythm with the waves. The monsoon winds carried not only ships, but also seeds. They floated in sacks and cargo holds, caught in grain or spice, scattered by accident or intention. On the eastern shores, in places that would later become ports of Zanzibar, Mombasa and Cairo, hemp took root again, bending in the sea breeze, drinking salt air. Fishermen used its ropes to haul nets, to lash their boats against tide and storm. Its fibers resisted the rot of salt. Its oil burned in lamps that marked the nights of trade. The scent of it lingered in marketplaces filled with noise, the cry of gulls, the call of sellers, the rhythm of drums. Its presence was never grand, but it was everywhere, in every knot, every flicker of light, every shared tool that linked one coast to another. In Europe, the plant arrived quietly, as most lasting things do. It was not announced by kings or scholars. It came through docks and workshops carried by sailors and merchants who valued its reliability. Along the shores of Greece, Italy, and the Iberian lands, weavers began spinning its fiber into thick, enduring cloth. The same threads that once caught desert dust now held the shape of sails, From these sails rose the first true ships of long exploration, their masts dressed in hemp, their ropes pulled taut by wind. Without it, the great voyages could not have begun. The sea depended on it, for the plant's strength resisted both salt and time. The wind became its companion, and together they pushed humanity farther than the maps allowed. In the northern lands, where nights grew longer and winters harsher, hemp offered something different. Farmers pressed its seeds for oil, a precious source of light when the sun vanished for months. In wooden cottages, families gathered around lamps fed by its golden liquid, watching shadows move across rough walls. Its warmth was steady, its smoke faint. Outside, the snow might bury the fields, but inside, the same plant that had crossed deserts and seas now burned quietly, binding one world to another through its constancy. In villages, rope-makers and sailors' wives twisted its fibers into cords that would one day travel back across the same oceans their men braved. The plant did not merely travel with humans, it became part of what made travel possible. At ports, the smell of hemp was unmistakable, a mingling of oil, wood, salt, and labor. Dockworkers coiled thick ropes into piles, their hands calloused but sure. Sailors rubbed oil into the fibers to keep them supple. On every deck, hemp was everywhere, in the sails above, in the ropes that held the masts, in the caulking between planks. Its fibers creaked, groaned, and sang in the wind. The sea had found its tether in a plant born from soil. And when storms struck, when ships leaned dangerously against waves, it was those same ropes, silent and unseen, that bore the strain and kept the vessel alive. From port to port, from one horizon to another, hemp connected worlds that never shared a language. In its fibers lay the proof that humanity, scattered and divided, still shared the same practical dreams: to bind, to build, to illuminate. A merchant in Alexandria might never meet the farmer in India whose fields grew the plant, but the rope that tied his cargo came from the same lineage. A sailor off the coast of Spain might never know the healer in China who once boiled its seeds for calm, but their hands touched the same thread of history. The plant's quiet persistence blurred borders and softened distances. It reminded every traveler that survival, not conquest, was the true purpose of movement. As centuries turned, hemp became so common that people stopped noticing it. It was in the cloth that covered them, in the sails that carried them, in the light that guided them through storms. Its simplicity was its disguise. While empires rose and fell, its stalks continued to sway in wind, growing without favor or complaint. It did not belong to any one nation, it belonged to need itself. The plant became the silent emblem of patience. Flexible yet strong, ordinary yet vital, its fibers echoing the endurance of the human spirit. The Silk Road eventually gave way to sea routes, and the desert caravans to ships with names and flags. Yet, if you followed the scent of the harbors, you could still find traces of that same ancient companion. In the dim corners of shipyards, old ropes hung drying in the sun. In the markets, oil lamps flickered beside sacks of grain and spice. In the weaving houses, the looms sang their slow rhythm, their threads stretching across generations. The plant had traveled farther than any conqueror, connecting worlds not through war, but through work. By the time merchants reached the far corners of the known sea, hemp was as common as grain. It had become the texture of civilization itself. Rough, dependable, honest. It linked hands through trade, through craft, through patience. Every sail that caught wind, every lamp that burned through the night, every rope that held a ship steady beneath the stars, carried the same quiet heritage. And though its name changed with every tongue, its purpose never did. It remained the same gentle traveler, a bridge between earth and effort, a witness to the endless motion of humanity, forever journeying, forever returning, carried forward on the unbroken wind. The medieval weave of use. Through the long centuries of Europe's Middle Age, the rhythm of life was slow and practical, guided by seasons rather than clocks. Fields stretched from village to village, and in nearly every one, hemp grew, tall, rough, and familiar. It stood beside barley, oats, and flax, sharing the same soil that fed both the poor and the noble. The plant was not strange, nor secret. It was a part of the daily world, as common as the smell of bread or the sound of the church bell. Its stalks rose high through the summer, turning from green to gold under the broad skies of England, France, Flanders, and beyond. When the wind moved through the fields, the rustling sound was soft and steady, like cloth brushing against itself, the whisper of a plant that had followed humanity for thousands of years. In those times, the world was built by hand. Ships were made from timber and sweat, sails from fiber and patience. The ropes that bound them, the cords that lifted anchors, and the lines that held masts steady, all were made from hemp. Without it, the sea would have been silent. From the smallest fishing boat to the grand vessels of merchants and kings, hemp was the muscle of movement. Its fibers resisted salt and sun, its strength held against the wild pull of waves. In the harbours of Genoa, Venice, and Bruges, the smell of wet hemp was constant, heavy, earthy, and clean. Rope makers worked along the docks, stretching long strands through open courtyards, twisting and coiling them until they gleamed with oil. When the ropes dried in the wind, they stiffened into the sound of labour, a faint creak, a hum of purpose that echoed through centuries of travel. On land, its presence was no less essential. In the halls of monasteries, scribes bent over parchment by the light of hemp oil lampi, their quills moving slowly across pages. The same oil that had burned in temples and ships now illuminated the careful strokes of monks, preserving knowledge through dark ages. Later, when paper began to replace parchment, hemp found new life again, its fibers beaten, soaked, and pressed into sheets that carried words across kingdoms. The first books, the earliest maps, the royal decrees, and the quiet letters between scholars all passed through its touch. The written memory of Europe was held together by the same plant that once tied ships to docks and nets to poles. For the peasants who worked the land, hemp was the fabric of life itself. Its coarse cloth wrapped their bodies through every season, its texture softening only with age and wear. In the cold months, garments woven from it held warmth. In the heat, they breathed and endured. The peasants' hands were never far from it. They sowed its seeds in spring, pulled its stalks in late summer, soaked and combed them in the fall. The work was rough and long. In villages near rivers, families would spread hemp stalks in water to loosen the fibers, leaving them to soak under the sky. The smell was sharp and sour, familiar to everyone who lived nearby. When winter came, they beat the fibers dry and spun them by firelight. The sound of spinning wheels joined the crackle of hearths, a small harmony of survival. Inside those homes, the scent of dried fiber and oil was constant. Tools were wrapped with cords of pale green thread to keep them from splitting, buckets bound with hemp rope, sandals tied with hemp laces. When leaves were burned, their smoke drifted gently through the rafters, chasing away insects, softening the air. In some cottages, people tossed handfuls of hemp into the hearth, not for ceremony, but for warmth, watching the stalks flare and glow before turning to white ash. The smoke carried a faint, sweet sharpness, a smell that blended with wood and bread, oil and damp stone, the smell of ordinary life. When someone fell ill, healers turned again to the same plant. They crushed its seeds and pressed the oil into thick salves. It was rubbed into swollen joints, onto cracked skin, into aching muscles after work. The balm smelled of grain and grass, simple and familiar. It did not promise miracles, it only eased. In an age when pain was constant and remedies few, that small mercy was enough. The healers who moved from village to village carried pouches of dried seeds and vials of oil. They were not mystics or priests, but quiet observers of what grew well and what soothed best. To them, the plant was a steady ally, dependable, unchanging, generous. Even within castles and manors where silk and wool adorned the rich, hemp remained indispensable. It hung in storerooms, coiled in stables, stretched across workshops. The very tents of armies and markets were woven from its fibers. When banners fluttered over battlefields, when carts creaked under harvest weight, when bells rang from towers built on hemp-bound scaffolds, all carried the hidden strength of the same plant. It did not belong to class or creed. It belonged to utility, to the quiet endurance that made life possible. Through famine, plague, and war, the hemp fields still turned green each spring. When kingdoms fell, when maps changed, when languages drifted and faiths divided, the farmers kept planting. Year after year, they bent to the soil, pulling the same rough stalks from the same earth their ancestors had touched. Time passed, harvest followed harvest, and the fields turned gold before they turned green again. There was a rhythm to it, one that echoed the larger rhythm of the world of decay and renewal, of use and rest. By the later Middle Ages, the plant's importance had grown so deep that it formed the backbone of industry. Guilds rose to regulate its trade, mills turned its fibers into sailcloth, and ships built from its strength carried Europe outward into unknown seas. The great voyages that would shape the coming centuries began with fields of hemp waving in the wind. It was there in the ropes that bound the sails, in the paper that recorded their journeys, in the cloth that clothed the sailors. And when those ships vanished beyond the horizon, they carried not only ambition and hope, but also the same quiet gift that had followed humankind since prehistory, the gift of endurance. It was never considered strange. It was never seen as sacred. It was simply known. To every farmer, sailor, monk, and child, hemp was a companion of work, an ordinary miracle that needed no explanation. The world around it changed. Faiths rose and crumbled. Empires expanded and fell. But the plant remained. In every thread of rope, every flicker of lamp, every soft piece of paper beneath a scribe's hand, its presence endured, steady as breath, silent as time itself. The age of ships and smoke. As the world began to widen, the horizon itself seemed to stretch beyond imagination. The age of discovery was not only a time of ambition and maps, but also of rope, cloth, and endurance. And through it all, the same patient plant that had followed humanity from riverbanks and temples now found itself aboard the grand ships that crossed the oceans. Hemp was everywhere, twisted into ropes that strained against the wind, woven into sails that caught the breath of the world, pressed into paper that carried the thoughts of explorers home. Without it, the oceans might have stayed untraveled, the continents unknown, the stories unwritten. It became the silent engine of exploration, not through invention, but through reliability, through the quiet strength that asked for nothing more than use. The docks of Lisbon, Amsterdam, and London were filled with its scent, a blend of sea salt, oil, and sun-dried fibre. Rope walks stretched for hundreds of yards, long, narrow workshops where men and boys worked side by side, twisting fibres into endless cords. The sound was rhythmic, a slow chant of labour, feet pacing backward, hands pulling, the faint rasp of hemp against wood. Sails made from its cloth hung in great folds above them, heavy when dry, almost alive when filled with wind. When the ships finally set out, they carried not just men and ambition, but entire fields' worth of hemp woven into every inch of their being. The ocean pulled against it, and the ropes held, the storms tore at it, and it endured. Every voyage, every crossing, every discovery was bound together by a plant that had been growing quietly for millennia. In the low cabins below deck, lanterns burned with oil pressed from its seeds. The light was soft, yellow, unblinking. It illuminated maps that were drawn and redrawn, journals filled with longing, and repairs made in silence. The oil burned cleanly, producing little smoke, a small mercy in air already thick with salt and sweat. It was the same light that once guided scribes through the dark halls of monasteries, now guiding sailors across endless seas. Above them, sails billowed like pale lungs, breathing with the wind. When night fell and the stars appeared, the ropes creaked, the hull groaned, and still the hemp held. A quiet force, keeping human hope from drifting apart. By the time the 17th and 18th centuries arrived, hemp had become an empire of its own. Fields stretched across Europe and the colonies, feeding the shipyards that built the age of trade and conquest. Kings and ministers wrote laws demanding its cultivation. Armies counted its fibers as carefully as grain. Every ship that left harbor carried miles of rope and acres of sail. The plant had become a necessity so complete that few ever thought to name it. It was simply there, part of the world's fabric, as natural as water or wood. From the canals of Venice to the icy wharves of the Baltic, the same smell drifted, tar, oil, and the faint green whisper of hemp drying in the wind. In the cities, the story continued in smaller, quieter rooms. Artisans used its oil in their lamps and varnishes. Writers dipped pens into ink under its glow, sketching the age as it unfolded. Painters mixed it into linseed and pigment to preserve their colors. Printers pressed words onto hemp paper that would last centuries. It became the unseen foundation of progress, holding together ships, buildings, books, and thoughts. The Industrial Revolution would later bring steam and steel, but before those, the age was built on the patience of plants. The hum of hemp rope under strain was the heartbeat of exploration, the creak of civilization stretching its limbs. Even as the world grew louder, filled with machines, with commerce, with war, the plant remained unchanged. In the 19th century, its usefulness once again turned toward healing. Physicians, searching through both science and tradition, studied its old, familiar calm. In England, France, and India, doctors observed how small tinctures of its extract eased pain and sleeplessness. They prescribed it quietly, respectfully, a few drops dissolved in water or mixed with honey. It did not cure, but it soothed. It allowed minds to rest where rest had been forgotten. In hospitals and homes, on battlefields and sickbeds, its presence was gentle, steady. It did not demand faith, it offered relief. For a time, it became medicine again, respected not for mystery, but for its honesty. Apothecaries kept it in glass bottles lined along wooden shelves, their labels written in careful script. Mothers carried it for children who could not sleep. Soldiers used it to calm the tremors of pain. Poets wrote of it as a dream of quiet, a small moment of mercy in an age of noise. And for a few decades, the world remembered what ancient hands had known, that within a single leaf there could live both rest and endurance, both calm and continuity. But as the century turned, so did perception. Industrial progress had its shadows, and among them came fear. Societies that once valued the plant's steadiness began to look at it with suspicion. Politics shifted, commerce changed, and a web of laws began to form. Laws that spoke louder than knowledge, louder than the quiet truth of the plant itself. Its image was reshaped by misunderstanding, its calm mistaken for danger. In some nations, fields that had fed ships and healed wounds were burned. What had once been as common as grain became a symbol of uncertainty. Yet through all of it, the plant itself remained unchanged. Its fibers still strong, its oil still soft, its scent still gentle in the sun. In the background of the industrial world, it continued to grow. It lingered in gardens, in the corners of farms, in wild fields beside rivers. It waited, as it always had, for the noise to settle. The machines that replaced its ropes would rust, the papers made without it would crumble. The plant, patient and unbothered, knew nothing of prohibition or politics. It only knew how to grow, to give, to return. Humanity's stories passed over it like waves over stone. When night falls in this long age of ships and smoke, one can almost imagine the same scent, the blend of oil, salt and flame, drifting through time. The same ropes that once held sails against the wind now hang in museums, frayed but unbroken. The same fibers that once lit explorers' maps still carry the faint trace of oil when touched by light. It was never the loud part of history, never the headline, never the monument. But in the silent weave beneath it all, in the endurance of trade, travel, and thought, hemp remained steady as breath, patient as time, waiting while the world spoke louder than it needed to. The slow return. Years passed, the world changed its shape again. Empires rose, ruled and fell, each convinced it had remade time itself. Machines came, then factories, then cities that glowed through the night. The soil was turned not by hands but by engines. Roads cut through old fields. Rivers were tamed by walls of stone. The air filled with noise and ambition. Yet beneath it all, in the quiet corners the world forgot to pave, the same plant endured. It grew in ditches and behind barns, by rivers and broken fences, near the edges of forgotten roads. Its leaves caught the same sunlight that once fell on pharaohs, monks and sailors. It did not care for empires. It did not need approval. It grew because that was what it knew how to do. For generations it had been everywhere, in the sails that carried discovery, the ropes that bound civilization together, the oil that lit the dark, the paper that preserved thought. But when laws rose against it, its name began to fade from the open tongue. In the noise of modernity, the world mistook familiarity for danger. It was not the first time something old was misunderstood. The fields that once shimmered gold and green were left to weeds. The hands that had known how to harvest and cure it grew older, their knowledge spoken only in fragments. The plant itself, patient as ever, adapted. It crept along railway edges and riverbanks, its seeds carried by wind and bird. It thrived in neglect. Where the world saw uselessness, it saw freedom. In small villages and farmsteads, a few never forgot. The old ones, those who had been raised before the great forgetting, still spoke of its fiber and its oil. They knew how the stalks cracked when dry, how the seeds smelled faintly of earth and grain. They remembered the smooth light of lamps fed by its oil, the strength of ropes made from its stem. They kept a few plants in corners of their gardens, half hidden behind wheat or willow. They called it by older names, the ones passed quietly from generation to generation. Not in defiance, but in affection. It was never rebellion. It was remembrance. In these hidden places time slowed. The modern world moved fast, factories roaring, newspapers shouting, the pulse of invention never still. But in the countryside, the rhythm was older, softer. Here, people still watched the sky for rain, still counted seasons instead of minutes. And in that slowness, the plant continued its quiet cycle. Seed to stalk, stalk to fiber, fiber to dust, and back again. It lived where patience survived, in the folds of mountains, in the breath between ploughing and harvest, in the still corners of memory. Through wars and peace, through revolutions of industry and thought, it remained. Soldiers marched across fields where it grew wild, its leaves brushing against their boots. Smoke from burning villages carried its scent without anyone noticing. When the wars ended, the ruins sprouted with it again, green shoots pushing through rubble, a living reminder that not all roots can be cut. To some, it became a symbol of resilience. To others, just another weed. But for those who remembered, it was proof that usefulness never truly dies. It only waits for the world to need it again. By the middle of the 20th century, voices began to return to it, not with the greed of conquest, but with curiosity. Scientists rediscovered its fibers, its oils, its strange balance of strength and calm. Farmers in quiet valleys began to plant it once more, under careful names, under cautious eyes. In some places it was called industrial hemp, in others a heritage crop, but to the soil it was all the same. Its roots broke hard ground, its stems gave shade to young plants. Its cycle healed the land that industry had exhausted. In laboratories and fields, its old virtues came back into language. The past, it seemed, was whispering again. Artists, writers, and wanderers found in it a kind of nostalgia, not for rebellion, but for rhythm. They saw in its return something that the modern world had lost, the idea that usefulness could also be peace, that simplicity was not weakness. The plant had never been about escape, it was about endurance. Its story was not loud enough for cities, but it was clear enough for those who listened, a thread connecting generations, a scent carried on the wind. In villages where it was never truly gone, farmers smiled quietly at the idea of rediscovery. They had always known. They had always kept a few seeds, always grown a few stalks among the corn. To them, nothing had returned, nothing had been lost. It was the world that had drifted too far and was now finding its way back. They watched as scholars and traders came asking for samples, measuring stalks, testing oil. The old farmers simply nodded, their hands rough, their eyes soft. The plant, they said, had never stopped waiting. By the end of the century, the rediscovery spread. Fields once covered in wheat began to hold hemp again, tall, golden green, swaying gently under open skies. Machines harvested it, laboratories studied it, but in essence, nothing had changed. The same fibers still bound, the same oil still burned, the same scent still carried through the evening air. The plant had returned not through protest, but through patience. It had waited like an old friend at the edge of a long road until humanity remembered to look back. And so after thousands of years, its story remained unchanged. It had been food, fabric, comfort, and it would be again. The world that once forgot it began to understand once more that not all progress is forward, that some wisdom lives in return. Under the same sun that had shone over the first fires and the earliest fields, hemp rose again, quiet and golden, waving in the wind as it always had. The noise of the cities rolled over the horizon and faded, and in the silence that followed, the earth seemed to exhale. The plant stood where it had always stood, green against the dust, steady as breath, a memory made real again. The continuity of growth. From one continent to another, through frost and drought, through silence and sound, the same enduring plant, hemp, cannabis, the old companion of humankind, continued its quiet journey. It had outlived kingdoms, crossed oceans, and survived laws meant to silence it. Where humans changed their flags, their faiths, their names for progress, the plant simply grew. It had no need for belief or approval. It lived by rhythm alone, seed to stalk, stalk to fiber, fiber to dust, and dust to seed again. Its presence became part of the landscape, a quiet green signature written in every climate that could bear life. It did not demand to be remembered, yet it never could be erased. From the cold plains of the north to the heavy heat of the tropics, it adapted without effort. In frost, its roots held firm, waiting under snow for spring to speak again. In drought, it bent, conserved, and returned with the rain. Farmers learned to trust its resilience. Sailors trusted its strength. Healers trusted its calm. Across time, across all the noise of progress and fear, the plant's quiet persistence became its most human quality. It mirrored the best parts of us: the will to survive, the patience to endure, the quiet grace to continue. When fields lay fallow, it was often the first to return, binding the soil, softening the earth. Even when forgotten, it remembered. Even when banned, it waited. Its wisdom was older than law, older than story, older than the idea of ownership itself. It had seen every kind of rule, every form of civilization. It had grown under emperors and kings, under gods of sun and storm, under flags that promised light and brought shadow. It had been the rope of ships that conquered, the cloth of peasants who endured, the oil of monks who prayed. It had known both hands of kindness and hands of greed. Yet it judged none of it. Where people saw purpose or sin, it saw only soil and light. In that neutrality lay its lesson that strength does not always roar, and endurance does not need applause. The plant simply was. And in its being, it offered a quiet kind of truth, that existence itself can be a form of resistance. Leaves spread, fibers lengthened, seeds waited for rain. The same slow rhythm that once sustained the early world continued untouched. In every age the uses returned: ropes, cloth, oil, rest. The pattern repeated across time as if memory itself were built into the plant's design. In a century of war, its fibers tied bandages. In peace, they wove sails and linen. When hunger came, its seeds offered food. When pain returned, its oils soothed skin. It had no single destiny. It was always whatever humanity needed it to be. The plant did not separate the sacred from the simple. It knew they were the same. Its constancy became its teaching. To watch it grow was to witness stillness that contained motion, patience that contained power. When the wind passed through its leaves, they shimmered without breaking. When storms came, it bowed and survived. There was no pride in its endurance, no defiance, only balance. The same balance the healers of China once spoke of, the same peace the monks felt in candlelight, the same breath the sailors exhaled when storms quieted. It was as if the plant had learned, long before humans ever named wisdom, that survival depends on gentleness more than force. Its green stood not for rebellion, but for resilience. Its color was the reminder that even in decay, life begins again. Those who touched it did not always understand it, but they always remembered it. A farmer might not know its history, yet he felt its fiber resist when twisted into rope. A sailor might never hear its story, yet he trusted it to hold against the ocean. A healer might not recite its origins, yet she knew the weight of its oil and the smell of its smoke. A child in a village might pluck its leaves without knowing they were ancient. Across centuries, hands reached for it in the same way, to me instinctively, gently, without ceremony. It was never a miracle, only a memory made useful. In every field where it grew, in every age where it was reborn, the same truth reappeared. Endurance is not loud. It does not march or shout. It does not ask to be seen. It works in silence, like growth itself. And in that silence, a lesson passed between generations without words. The plant taught without teaching that stillness is not the absence of life, but its foundation. That calm can hold more power than motion, that the simplest things often carry the deepest weight. When the world once again began to look backward, searching for balance after centuries of speed, it found the plant waiting, unchanged. Scientists traced its lineage through DNA. Historians traced its path through paper and rope. Every discovery led back to the same conclusion. It had always been there, close to us, shaping the unseen fabric of civilization. The world had tried to replace it, to improve upon it, to forget it, yet every attempt only proved its quiet perfection. The plant did not evolve to match us. We returned to match it. In the end, its story was not written in smoke or law, but in soil, in the soft permanence of the earth that remembers what the mind forgets. Beneath every city, beneath every ruin, beneath every grave, there is soil, and within that soil, the memory of growth. Hemp's roots had touched all of it. Its seeds had crossed continents, carried by birds, wind, trade, and chance. Its fibers had held the weight of ships and thoughts alike. Its scent, faint but eternal, had drifted across ages. What more could be said of any living thing? It had seen the rise and fall of human pride, and still it grew. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because growth itself was its only purpose. And so the plant remained, as it had since the beginning, a quiet mirror to the world's motion. Its story needed no ending because it had never truly begun. It existed before memory and would exist after noise. Its constancy was the thread running through all human time, a reminder that the greatest endurance often hides in simplicity and that what bends does not break. The plant's lesson, whispered through leaf and root, was older than history and truer than empire. That strength lies in stillness, and that to grow quietly, again and again, is the most human act of all. The quiet ending, the sleep of earth. Now the night deepens again, and the air takes on that old, unbroken calm, the same breath that has passed over fields and mountains for 5,000 years. The wind moves gently through the empty spaces, carrying with it the faint scent of soil and green, the whisper of leaves that no longer exist, yet somehow remain. The world has quieted. The noise of centuries, the clamor of invention and conquest, all fades into the same steady hum that has always lived beneath everything. Above the fields, the sky folds into a deeper shade of blue, the stars slow in their turning. The earth exhales, and somewhere far below, in the dark soil that remembers every root, seeds wait, patient, silent, alive. The fields are empty now, but not dead. Beneath the frost, life holds its breath. The stalks that once stood tall have fallen back into the ground, returning their strength to the same place that gave it. There is no hurry in this exchange, no sense of loss, only the long rhythm of return. It is the same rhythm that began before the first hand touched the first seed. The plant has always known this, that endurance is not in motion, but in patience. It rests now, not as something ended, but as something waiting. When the frost breaks, when the sun finds its angle again, the green will rise as if time itself was simply turning a page. In that soil lies the memory of everything, the footsteps of farmers long gone, the tools they left rusting beside stone walls, the ash from fires that burned when nights were still filled with stars. All of it folded back into the same dark silence. The plant's roots trace through it like gentle lines of thought, reaching deeper than history, carrying no grief, no pride, only continuation. It has followed humanity through every age, from the first shelters by the river to the ships that crossed the horizon, to the towers that now hum with light. Yet it asks for nothing from us. It grows when left alone. It returns when forgotten. The world's progress and its stillness both belong to it. The night carries a feeling older than language, not sorrow, not joy, just the vast sense of being. In this quiet, the mind slows enough to hear what the day hides. The sound of your own breath matches the slow breathing of the world. You can feel it, faintly, in the air. The shared pulse between body and soil, between time and sleep. The plant, somewhere below the frost, waits with you. It does not dream, but it endures, and that endurance feels like peace. Far away, the rivers move under thin sheets of ice, their currents steady and cold. The wind brushes across the surface of the earth, touching everything but claiming nothing. In small villages, lamps flicker out one by one. The smell of smoke fades. Only the memory of warmth remains, drifting upward like the last sigh of a long day. The fields rest under the moonlight, silver and still, the old rose barely visible under snow. In that stillness you can imagine the faint outline of green waiting below, a soft geometry of patience. The world does not need tending tonight. It knows what to do. The plant's story, like the world's, was never about power or change. It was about staying, the quiet act of presence. Through the endless motion of human time, it remained a witness, soft-spoken and constant. It saw every rise and fall, every invention and loss, and offered the same thing in return: fiber, oil, seed, calm. It never fought the world, it simply followed it. Its lesson was simple, and perhaps that is why it lasted so long. That to be steady is greater than to be great, and to remain is its own kind of victory. You breathe slowly now as the old earth breathes with you. The rhythm of inhale and exhale becomes the rhythm of tide, of wind, of root. Each breath moves through you like the turning of seasons, quiet and endless. The room around you fades until there is only the sound of air, the faint pulse in your chest, and the soft hum of everything returning to rest. The earth holds you the way it holds the seed, gently, without urgency, knowing that rest is part of growth. The fire burns low, the last embers shift, their glow deepening into red. Shadows slide along the walls, stretching, fading. The air grows still, thick with the scent of wood and warmth. Outside, frost begins to gather on the edges of windows, tracing delicate lines like veins of memory. Somewhere beyond that glass, the fields sleep beneath layers of silence, their colors hidden but waiting. And as the last of the warmth lingers, the world folds into itself. The hum of machines, the weight of thought, even the quiet pulse of the heart, all begin to drift into the same still ocean of rest. The plant, the earth, and the air are one again. Time no longer feels like something moving forward, but something circling back. Gentle, infinite, familiar. Sleep comes slowly, as it should. It arrives not with weight, but with release, wrapping around you like the long memory of green. The fields that once held the world's labor now hold its rest. The same wind that once filled sails and stirred fires now moves only to cool the night. The same soil that once fed empires now feeds the silence. Everything is where it belongs. The world breathes once more, calm and endless, and you breathe with it, steady, unhurried, at peace. The story, like the plant, does not end. It only sleeps.